So please, if you'll lead us off.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, so tonight we're here to present the first interim budget assumptions for discussion. And just for the benefit of the public, I'd like to just talk about why we do these interim reports. School districts are required to file two reports during the fiscal year, and they're called interim reports on the status of the district's health. The first interim report is due December 15th for the period ending October 31st. And then, of course, the second interim report is due March 17 for the period ending January the 31st. So also included in the interim reports must be a certification of whether or not the LEA or the school district is able to meet its financial obligations. And the three classifications are positive, qualified, and negative. Now, positive certification means that the district will meet its financial obligations for the current and two subsequent fiscal years. A qualified certification means that the district may not meet its fiscal obligations for the current or two subsequent years. And a negative certification means that a district will be unable to meet its financial obligations for the remainder of the current year or for the subsequent fiscal year. So I just want for us to reflect a little bit on how far we've come over the last three fiscal years. In fiscal year 2017-18, at the first interim, we filed a classification of negative. Again, this means that a district will not be able to meet its financial obligations for the remainder of the current year or the subsequent fiscal year. We made mid-year cuts that year, tightened our belt, and by the second interim, we'd filed a qualified classification. Since that time, we have filed, for school year 2018-19, we filed a positive classification at first interim and a positive classification at second interim. And we expect to file a positive classification for this first interim report this fiscal year. As a governance team, we have made tremendous sacrifices. We've made some very tough decisions. We've cut, I would say, over $20 million out of our budget. We have made all of the tough decisions that have gotten us to a much better place fiscally. We've closed now 5 schools over the last fiscal year. So we're doing all of the heavy lifting, all of the hard work that needs to be done to get to a better place fiscally. Now, a lot has been written about this first interim report in local media outlets without the benefit of explanation or context. And there are many aspects of our budget that are extremely positive, and I'll just list a few. The reserve balance is the highest it has been in 15 years. Staffing is much tighter than it has been in recent years, meaning that we are staffing much closer to our staffing ratios. This is a third consecutive positive certification that we've filed over the last 3 fiscal years. And I would say that budget transparency has greatly improved. So I'd like to ask and just remind our viewers and our community and this board that early budget projections are extremely conservative. We have not overspent by $3.5 million, as has been represented in the local media. Again, I think that we are in much better shape fiscally, and we will be, hopefully, for many years to come. So we've tried to be as responsive as possible to this governance team. We've answered the questions that have come up. And sometimes we have philosophical differences around how we should proceed as one governance team. But I think it's imperative that we find a way to speak with one voice on matters related to the district. And despite our differences of opinion, we have to figure out a way to move forward together for the benefit of our district. And we have to do all of these things if we are to take our rightful place as a respected social institution in this community. So again, I wanted to make this statement to dispel some of the false narratives that are out there in the local media. Dr. Barnes will present here in a minute. Just want to say that we have a lot of work left to do. We are always looking for ways to cut expenses and to find efficiencies in our budget. We're always thinking about ways to find additional sources of revenue. And we're committed to continuing to work to really position this district for success. And so I want to just take a minute to thank Dr. Barnes and her team for their hard work on this, and other fiscal related matters. Since she has come to us, she has implemented quite a bit of positive change that I think will bode well for the district in years to come. So with that, Dr. Barnes, I ask you to come up and present our first interim budget assumptions report.
Thank you, Dr. McDonald. So tonight, I'm here to present the budget assumptions. And so the goal of the presentation is review and acceptance of the assumptions included in the first interim report for our revenues and our expenditures. And we'll have a subsequent, hopefully, approval of the first interim report on Monday, December 16th. So as Dr. McDonald already alluded to, there's education code requiring us to certify at least twice a year the district's ability to meet its financial obligations. Beyond that, Pasadena has board policy that after the budget is adopted in June, no unrestricted expenses for the fiscal year shall be increased in subsequent revised or interim budgets throughout the fiscal year unless the items being increased have been board approved. And revenues may be adjusted in subsequent revised or interim reports. So tonight I'm here on behalf of, or in alignment with this board policy. The district's revenue assumptions have been calculated based on actual daily attendance reports as of November 7th that the business office received for Norm Day. From these Norm Day enrollment figures, we calculate additional decline through April. As you know, the district's funded on our period 2 attendance reports, which happen as of April 15th. And so students, once they arrive, they don't always stay for various reasons. We still decline, especially at the secondary level, throughout that period. And so we take the Norm Day data and reduce it based on trend to come up with what we believe will be our funded ADA. Changes for funded ADA are realized in the subsequent year. So we do have a 1-year lag if you're declining, so that gives you a chance to kind of catch up on teacher layoffs or certificate or classified layoffs, I should say, to keep up with the budget reductions or the revenue reductions. The exception to this would be the unduplicated count. Once that's established, you do get that in the current year. And so we have had some changes in our unduplicated count that we've included in our interim report. And This is the result of our community eligibility provision, which is a non-pricing. What this allows us to do is students within the district that are either on Medi-Cal or on SNAP who are receiving public aid, if they become automatically certified for free and reduced lunch. The more students you have who are automatically certified, you qualify for what they call CEP, to be a CEP site. This year we have 18 CEP sites, and that allows us to, it allows students to not have, or parents to not have to fill out a meal application at all. Everybody at that site is allowed free meal, both at breakfast and at lunch. And so one of the requirements for LCFF is, and to determine our unduplicated count, is to identify our students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Given this, that now we're CEP sites and students don't have to fill out that meal application, we've gone to what we call an alternative income form. We did have a few sites last year that were CEP, and we used a different alternative income form. This year we transitioned to something that I had used at my previous district, which allows parents to designate within a income range. Last year, I guess we had asked for a specific income and didn't get as many forms back as we would have, because you can imagine people don't really feel comfortable filling out what their income is. And so these bands of income ranges align to free, reduced, or full paid. And so that allows the IT department to calculate that data for us. It was very successful this year. Our food service department worked very hard to get the word out to parents that although you do receive free meals, that this form is needed. We worked with IT to have anyone who enrolled online, that this form was available online. We also reached out to the principals during an operations meeting and let them know the importance of this form. And through all that, we were able to identify 571 more students than we had originally identified or had anticipated. And so that's money that will come in through S&C funds this year, which is about $1 million. It's over $1 million. And so we're pretty happy about that, and I want to thank Elizabeth Powell and her staff, and TJ and his staff, and of course all the principals that worked so hard to get those forms back to us. And what this proves is that we have students who are below the poverty level, at the federal poverty level, who in the past have just not either wanted to eat in the cafeteria or go through the process of filling out a meal application. And so this has allowed us to identify those students. And so we hope that the CEP provision will continue. We are locked in for 4 years at the sites that we're currently at. And so should there be any changes in federal regulations that are being discussed that would make SNAP not eligible for the automatic certification, then we would have to go back to meal applications at that point. But this form is very successful, and I'm hoping that there would be some provision that we could use so that if you don't fill out a meal application, you'd still be able to do this form. The revenue assumptions are highlighted in the dartboard, and these are really for our revenue assumptions, meaning that they don't really align to our norm day actual enrollment. These are, as I said, we take the norm day data and we reduce it. And so, so I know there was some talk about what was our actual decline this year. And from norm day to norm day, our actual decline was around 380 students, depending. I have a few different norm day numbers, so I would say around 380. But what this is used for is, like I said, this is really to project our revenues. And so when we're projecting our revenues for 2021, Originally, in our adopted budget, we had a loss of 300 for each of the 2 years. Given all that we've been through with the school closures, we did, in our interim report, increase the decline to 500 in 2021 and then remain 300 in 21-22, just given past history of when we've closed schools before, we found that there was a kind of a bigger decline in the out year. And so, so we did that. As we said, it's the unduplicated count has increased by 571. We then took a drop of 2% in the next year and 1% in the year after that, just because that is the population that we see declining, and so we wanted to be consistent with that. The COLA, one of the things that we do have a COLA based on our approved assumption sheet from LA County. And in 2021, it's showing a 3% cost of living adjustment. I think we've all heard that there's speculation that that will go down to 1.79. However, the county at this time didn't want us to drop that. So that's still at 3%. It's something that we need to look at as we go forward. It's about a $1.5 to $2 million decline revenue-wise for us if that goes down. 1.5 to 2 million. So, so we'll be looking at that. It'll definitely be adjusted to whatever is certified at second interim report. And I think that's it for that page. Our other revenues, we are on track to receive, definitely receive the $5 million. It's actually, we've received $3.1 million in Measure J funds to date. That's from July through November. And so it's been averaging about $629,000 a month. We haven't hit December, which I would anticipate would be a much larger month, December and January. And so taking roughly the 628 per month, even without an increase in those other months, we would be on target to hit about 7.2 million. And so at this time, it's too soon, but I believe we'll have a really good case at second interim to have the county allow us to increase that number, which may make up for the COLA. Let's see. Special ed funding, there is some special ed funding of approximately $2.5 million for preschool, and that funding, it's here, but the county wouldn't let us approve it, or they wouldn't let us include it in there. So we had a roundtable with the county, and districts were not pleased with their response, but for some reason they said that we were not allowed to use it. They did understand that we probably would have received it by the time that our first interim report was completed, but still did not. It told us if we included it in our first interim report that we had to show what we would cut if it went away, and so it was just easier not to include it. So we didn't. Our expenditure assumptions. So we have, there have been changes since our adopted budget, and they fall into roughly 4 categories. Alignment to actual costs. Once we closed the books, there were areas that we saw our actuals were higher than what we budgeted, and so in some areas we have increased our budget to align to those actual costs. There have been board approvals of certain items, and so anything that's been board approved that was not included in the original adopted budget was also captured in the first interim report. Current staffing costs, most of those would fall under the board approvals as well, but I wanted to highlight those. We do take the enrollment projections and the staffing projections, and that's what we budget to. In the future, we're looking to create a bank so that we don't have, if we have overages, based on staffing ratios or K-3 class size reduction regulations. We want to make sure that we have that little buffer so we don't have to actually increase the budget for these. And then we would just have savings if we didn't have that additional staffing. So that's something we're looking at changing in the future. And anticipated need based on current trends. As we look at our months and then project out, there might be areas where we see that things are trending a little bit higher, and we want to make adjustments for those as well. So there are kind of two methods of capturing these costs amongst CBOs. There's the idea that if you have additional costs, certainly we haven't spent all our money, so we could ask people, we could say, do a budget adjustment and move money from one area to this other area, and we don't capture these costs because we'll wait until they actually run out of money if they've, until they spend they've expended their budget amount. I would prefer to capture it at the first interim report because it's more conservative and much better to be able to have a look and say, this is our worst case scenario, not our best case scenario. And so that's why these were captured now. And so I just want to clarify that we haven't spent it yet. We may not spend it because as budgeting is a plan, things change. A lot of times people have budgeted for items that they don't spend. And so these additional expenditures may be absorbed within salary savings or savings throughout the budget. And so, like I said, that was really to be conservative, given all that we've been through. And so adjustments, let me make sure. So to align costs to reflect our prior year actuals, we did have two areas that we needed to do that in, and that was the utilities and the transportation. Utilities we had some issues with lag times in our utility bills, and so at the time that we were creating our budget, we didn't have the full data to estimate out our utilities. Transportation, there was a delay also in our receipt of our invoices. They invoiced at a certain rate. There was a bit of a dispute, and so they re-invoiced us. So we didn't have the figures at the time that we were budgeting to know what our true costs were in transportation. And so once we closed the books and had accrued all that, we were able to add that cost as well. Contracted services, there were a couple, two items that were approved last year, and invoices were not accrued for, totaling $29,000. We also have, going into the next category, which reflects board-approved costs that are not in the adopted budget. Total expenditures and contracted services in this area were $451,000. And I know I sent out what those were, and I had mentioned that bolded areas were areas that were already board approved, and the utility and transportation, I believe they were bolded, and those actually have not gone to board yet, and so I wanted to make that correction. Adjustment for our true staffing, as I said, we go ahead and we staff based on projections, and then there's a process where HR will sit with each principal and go through what their staffing is. They've kept very tight to that, and I know Dr. Rodchenko and Kingsley Udo in my office sat with each principal that either needed to lose a staff member or needed to gain additional in order to make sure that they had enough staff and to go ahead and adhere to their master schedules. So anyway, those were done. once all of the ins and outs of the staffing were done, for budget purposes, we needed to add 7.76 FTE to our first interim report. For custodians, we had originally budgeted 115 FTE and five subs for a total of 120. The contract actually says that you need 120 full-time FTEs, and so this is the difference between the sub and actually having the full-time FTE. So that's what the custodians are. So that's to adhere to contract language. Site staff, based on particular need, we do have 2 sites that needed interim principals this year. That happened after budget was adopted. And then there was just some ins and outs of various staffing where we'll use maybe a step 3 and they ended up either higher or lower. And so that netted out to about $5,500. Increased cost based on trend and current need. We had some costs that were in the current year for last year's summer move. So part of that, we had increases for 1920. Also, we wanted to capture some initial costs that may take place before June 30th. We want to buy boxes. We want to get some of the contractors on board. So there's some money, $339,000 in the current year to get those things started, and then $300,000 in 2021. This doesn't include the ADA compliance. At that time, I didn't have the numbers for that. And so I believe in January, we'll come back and talk about what it looks like for the ADA compliance and how we think we might fund those. Substitute costs based on 18-19 actuals and the trend to date. So that's just to really bring those up to 18-19. Contracted services for athletic trainers. We didn't actually have budget for athletic trainers, and it was something that our 4 sites definitely needed. And so we went ahead and added $10,000 for each site, but since we're getting a late start, it's prorated to $20,000. Our workers' comp rate, we had talked about at the budget adoption, or I'm sorry, at the unaudited actuals, we had come in about $5.2 million over what we had anticipated. And at that time, I had designated in the fund balance $1 million to go into the workers' comp fund. As I was building the interim report, since we did have added costs, I didn't want to move that whole $1 million into workers' comp yet. So I went ahead and, as one of the assumptions, decided to increase the rate. So at least we're getting something into the workers' comp fund. We did have a finding on this in our audit last year.
Yeah.
And so it's proposed to increase the workers' comp rate from 4.5 to 4.75, and also the other post-employee benefits from 0.63 to 0.75 for a 0.12% increase. We want to make sure that those unfunded liabilities, at least we're showing some progress. I don't know that, with OPEB, I don't know we'll ever get there, but I know workers' comp, we can get there. And then for our LCAP carryover, that fell to the fund balance, and we went ahead and gave sites their carryover funds, and so that actually comes out of the fund balance. And so those total $3.5 million, the expenses that were included in the interim report. What's not in the interim report are savings for the school consolidations. We've not yet entered those into the reports. In talking with LA County as to how to handle that, they said that as long as we've not yet notified employees, that they didn't feel it was prudent to put it in now. And so they suggested we waited till second interim. So any savings, and it will be more helpful, it'll be a more accurate number to place it in the second interim report, because we will have had students select where they're going, and we can get a better idea on actual staffing. salary increases above what has already been negotiated have not been included in the budget. We would need to await the governor's budget proposal to see what we might have at the table. I had included $4 million in reductions in the budget adoption. That number can go down, could go up. I don't really know at this point, and so it's likely to change. Again, I'd like to see what the governor's budget proposal is, and then also what it is we might be looking for in negotiated items. So these assumptions are very conservative. They reflect actuals, as Dr. McDonald had said, through October 31st, and what we may anticipate through June 30th. We will continue to find ways to increase revenues and monitor our expenses. Departments, we had originally kind of given a list of how we might possibly get to the $4 million. In looking at department needs, right now I have staff looking at perhaps a 5% reduction to departments, but we really need to go through and say, what does that number actually come to? And are there departments that it's just not possible? So we want to make sure when we give departments their budget allocation for next year, even though it may be reduced, I would like them to be at least, have the ability to do it. I don't want to. So rather than just take a shot at contracted services or something like that, I would rather have the departments provide that to us so that they know they know their department's best and what could possibly be cut. So that would be something that I would compile and bring back to the board as part of the second interim report. The hope is that this would be enough to build a little bit of a cushion so that we won't be, if there's anything not budgeted, we won't need to worry anybody with saying we're going to use the fund balance. And then also to cover any changes in the governor's budget. So that number can go up, could go down, but that's the plan at this point. The property exchange, we have had talks with the city, and we are looking at that. I'm going to have Mr. Manukian come to the January board and present a possible timeline and some assumptions in that area as well, and to see how quickly that can be done. And that's what I had for you this evening.
All right. Do we have comments? Go ahead. So
Keep hitting
I
the,
think we have public comments cards on this.
oh, no, we don't.
No, we
think
don't?
so.
Okay.
We have a lot on the consent,
Oh, very good.
5 of them.
Okay, so,
Quick question.
yes.
Did that alarm go off because it's 10 o'clock and we have to say we want to stay here?
Yes,
Just checking. So should we do that
sure.
before we?
So 10 o'clock, according to our board protocols, we're supposed to get a motion to extend the meeting.
So move.
Do we have a time?
She'd say 1 a.m.
No.
It can only go to 11.
I was going to say, I mean, it's going to be, I'm going to say 10:45, but
Second.
I could also say 11.
I think we should just assume that it's going to take 11 if we have that many public comment cards
I-
for consent.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that part. I'll definitely say 11.
Okay,
I'll second the 11.
all right. So all approved? All right, very good. So time certain, we will end at 11. All right. So questions on this?
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. I really have to commend you on your transparency improvements. I agree with that part of what Dr. McDonald said about improved transparency. So in the other document, can you bring up that there's 2 documents? There's I don't know if you can. No?
I don't think so.
Well, you probably know this off the top of your head, because you know this like the back of your hand. When I'm looking at that document, and Ms. Kenny can help me interpret that,
This one? It's this one.
yeah, well, the one that, no, it's on the, you know how there's two, it's called assumptions documents. It's the usual multi-year comparison thing, spreadsheet. So, and Ms. Kenny has a better sense of this than I do, but is the row, I guess, that's called net increase or decrease in fund balance?
Yeah.
Where from adopted to first interim, it went from 6.2 million to 8.4 million?
Correct.
So is that what you would call deficit spending, the amount of deficit spending?
Yes.
Okay. So deficit spending with these adjustments has gone up by 2 rounded off million. Okay. So, all right. And then the other thing where you talked about the 4 million that you had in 2021, right? It's actually a slide in your June adoption, as you very well know. So, first of all, on a higher level picture, if you, not all of these costs, these 3.5 million, are ongoing,
Correct.
but some of them are. So, without any changes in revenue assumptions, right? I know you said that it's conservative because I think you're implying, I don't know, there could be better news, right, going forward. Without that, would that not go up then to more than $4 million because of these adjustments to the budget?
We still make our 3% reserve. In
No,
the
no, I
years.
understand that, but I'm talking about the number of the amount of reductions.
Yes, that would be my recommendation.
It would go up, okay. So I know Dr. McDonald was not pleased with the characterization in the media, but I've been through this many times, and that's the reason we put the policy in there, right? So we wouldn't have these surprises, right? And I appreciate that you're willing to honor that, and Ms. Kenny, I'm sure, will help us determine what we've approved and what we haven't. The thing that hit me when I saw the 3.5 million number was the following. Would you say, and I know you're not the county, you sounded like George Bush the first a little bit a while ago, wouldn't be prudent, right? To put in the, what do you call them, the savings from the school closures? Is that what it was? It wouldn't be
Yes, that was
prudent
one
to
of
include them until after, which is what I had thought that they wouldn't be definite for the county until people were notified.
Right.
Okay. But could you estimate the savings? So just based on a round number of 3 more elementaries and 1 fairly large middle school.
Right now, just based on.
Ballpark, yeah.
Yeah, I would say,
Net savings. I mean, you can subtract out moving or whatever.
yeah, at this point, I'd say about $1.5 million
Yeah.
without teachers.
Yeah, that's what I would guess. I mean, maybe I was going to say $1.75 million, but we're in the ballpark. So what hit me about this and why I reacted the way I did was we had just gone through a tremendously difficult process of school closures. Tremendously difficult. The board had closed the schools. And I get news that there's increased costs, and the increased costs are twice what the savings from all that pain would be. Twice. So I don't think that's okay. And I've said, it's not like I haven't shared, we haven't shared there's this red herring criticism of one voice. We gave a resolution in August of 2017 when we saw the train going off the tracks. And we asked for a lot of things. And I can say I was reviewing that recently, pretty much that was ignored. And that was unanimously approved. So you can't get more one voice than unanimous, by the way. And then we passed a policy unanimously in January of 2018. And of course, we didn't have to worry about it as we were cutting, right? I'm sure we had less expenditures. We didn't go over in expenditures, right? But now we have to worry about it. And here, while we're going through the ugliness of school closures, the budget is getting blown up by this amount of money. And so you can call it, say you're not over budget, right? But if the amount of reductions that we have to make, barring no new revenue, goes up, if the deficit spending goes up, we're not able to meet our goal of raising rank and file salaries slowly that we want to do to get up, right? Then yes, there is a problem with the budget. And this is the issue in this district. We have not adjusted to the reality of declining enrollment. We have declining enrollment, massive declining enrollment. And we're still operating as if we don't. And I understand that. It's human nature. We know everybody. We know everybody. We know people at the schools, right? But when you're increasing staffing, when 50 more kids don't show up than projected, right? 330 was projection. And we're increasing staffing. That doesn't make any sense, right? So I understand really the positive development. I went through it all, the positive development over the last 3 years. It's amazing, right? The different, where the county isn't breathing down our necks and we have more of a cushion. But we have acted with one voice. The staff hasn't responded. And then the other thing I wanted, you said something that was amazing to me. Do we have a contract that says we have to keep the same number of custodians no matter how many schools we have? 120? Or does it allow for school closings?
It allows for school closing.
Oh, whew, okay. Jeez. I mean, they're very good at negotiating. So, but, and by the way, I fully support what they're doing in their leadership. I think it's some other part of the assignments tonight. That's a wonderful collaboration with Dr. McDonald and staff. So going forward, I just want to say what I'm going to do going forward. You know, because as another George Bush said, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? Although he didn't get it out quite correctly, but I'm going to ask on every agenda item whether it's in the budget or not, including personnel assignments. And I'm not gonna. I'm kind of with Ms. Kenny on this. I'm not gonna agree to ratify POs as being approval of increased expenditures, because you see, another reason that I was so upset about this is it's too late. You can't go and take those teachers away from those schools, those additional 8 teachers. You can't. That's just terrible to do. Can't do that, right? And the purchase order, I mean, that's been spent. You can't like say, oh, we're not going to ratify a purchase order, right? And this is why I've said to people, am I going to vote to approve this? Yes, absolutely. Because if I don't approve this budget, right, really bad things happen, right? But I'm giving you my point of view that, yes, we've had a lot of improvement, but we're still not, we haven't adapted to this reality. If we're adding staff with less students, then we have not adapted to our reality. And you're clear on that. I think this is very transparent in your work. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Where to go from there? So in terms of this board policy that we approved, where it talks about having a credible cushion held in the unassigned ending balance, which Mr. Phelps says, I'm thinking about it. So yes, this increases the deficit, and then it uses up more of the ending balance, and that's where the cushion was. So without, I'm not clear how else we would see it represented. In other words, we didn't say there's a cushion of X dollars. Because if we said there was a cushion of 4 million in the ending balance, actually at 3, and we look, oh, look, we used 2.2 of it. We still have 0.8 till the end of the year. So maybe part of why this isn't working is we didn't set a number that was our credible cushion
Yeah, I agree.
for these changes. So that's one thing.
In the policy, we asked Leslie, because she's the expert.
But then number two, we didn't approve some of these. And I would agree that there's no way to have a list of 200 purchase orders and to know which ones are budget increases and which ones aren't without them being marked as such and saying that if any of us vote to approve them, that we've improved increase to the budget. Because that was pretty, I would describe it as an unknowing increase. But I do want to also say that it says systemic blocks preventing spending over budgeted amounts shall remain in place throughout the year. And I feel like I've seen some negative balances, so I'm a little worried about that one. And we've had CBOs who said, I don't know how to implement this policy, or this policy is not the norm. So I don't know if we need to do some working out with staff. I don't want to, you know how I feel. I don't want to have policies that we're just not following. So we need to come to some conclusion with staff about whether they are going to follow the policy that we have approved. Otherwise, we will have this kind of tension between, but why aren't you doing it? We've all agreed. Oh, but you didn't really agree, but you're staff, so you don't get to vote on a board policy. So, lovely information that could all be discussed at a finance committee.
Oh, the plug.
Sorry,
The plug.
just gonna do that.
was coming.
So, I don't think I need to go over again that fuel and insurance and transportation, well, transportation utilities don't have purchase orders, so we couldn't approve them, or they haven't had yet. Utilities don't seem to have them at all. That's just we'll have to work on that. Just to say something about teacher staffing, and again, this may be somewhere where we've talked about having a cushion of teacher staffing.
Yeah.
But I do think we have to acknowledge that we increased, according to these numbers, 5 elementary teachers from what we projected. But we went down 164 students, which means we should have gone -6, which is a total of 11 over when what our change from projected by students would have led us to having 11 fewer teachers, but instead, I'm sorry, yes, we have 5 more, 11 more than we ought to. And I think I guess it's being intentional that we don't want to find ourselves spending money and not really know how we got here, or we don't want, as the board, to be told, well, by the way, we're over teachers, because no, we're not going to take teachers away in December. We're not.
We're not going to do that.
But it kind of puts us in a position of, well, I'd like to say no, but I can't now, and I really don't like being forced into a position where I had no say in that. So I'm assuming I'm trying to echo and what Mr. Phelps is saying and express his frustration about, but again, feeling like there's ways to proceduralize this. So a few of my points, and I just want to make sure that it's really clear on the enrollment. And maybe next time we'll have a line for
On
norm
Monday.
day enrollment
Yes.
and then spring enrollment that affects our P2 so that people don't get confused, because people were texting me all day being very upset. What I want to say about the COLA change, the savings for schools, so as soon as we have the governor's budget in January, I'm hoping we get an updated multi-year projection. We need to start bargaining. We need to start budget planning so that we can have an LCAP that, looks at what we want for next year, and have to make layoff decisions, which, again, so there's a deadline for that. And March 15th, we can't find out that information on March 15th when we approve the second interim budget, but the deadline just passed for us to be able to do anything in terms of certificated layoffs. And so I'm kind of saying, let's do some multi-year looking at things, incorporating, if the COLA comes into play, So even though we can't submit multi-year to the county with things like the other 2 million of the Measure J or the 2.5, I mean, we can put them on our internal reports for our planning, I assume. There's no rules against that.
Yeah.
I do think that having an updated staffing sheet, I know we have that staffing sheet, but it still has our projected enrollment. So it didn't recalculate with our real enrollment so that we could actually on one piece of paper say, oh, look, ratios would have led us to this number of students, teachers, but we have this, and let's all acknowledge that we have more or fewer or, but there isn't a way on this paper you presented us with to know.
Yeah, I think that I did want to clarify one thing, but I didn't want to interrupt, or if the board would like me to clarify staffing,
Yeah.
All right, let me
but I will
do
let
one.
Ms. Kinney finish.
Okay, two more things. So the new 1.3 million of supplemental and concentration, I would highly recommend that we do some kind of stakeholder communication with what to do with it. In other words, I don't want it to just kind of go, oh, look, there's extra money, and walk away, because maybe we should give that to sites and site councils. But I mean, it should be thoughtfully spent at this point now that we've identified it, not just kind of say, oh, there it is, and then like 3 months from now go, I wonder where it went. Maybe we used it for the increase in custodians, but I sure hope not. And I do think it would be good to hear from staff about the plan for the 2.5 special ed preschool. Like, are we going to spend it this year at all? Are we going to give it to special ed to spend? Are we going to spend it on something else? Are we going to hold on to it and save it for next year? And I would say that I'm not a big fan typically of 5%, 10% across the board. That I think, I mean, I just hope we can be more thoughtful and targeted and think about, and I recognize that this is more work, it's more value driven. Like what do we need to keep? What can we let go of? Because it's not just about everybody gets the same minus a little bit. Maybe this department needs to shave back a lot so that this department can have, I don't know, there's at least a conversation, again, that should happen somewhere to make sure that our budget is program and value driven, not last year minus 5%.
Okay, so Dr. Miller.
So I did just want to take a moment in terms of our staffing. We have staffed tightly. We have 3 individual meetings with principals regarding staffing and monitoring their enrollment. And in addition to that, when it's all said and done and we have staffed the schools, then we sit down in a cross-functional meeting with budget, academics, and human resources, because there are questions that we have for each one of our schools. For instance, if we wanted, we're running a small French class at Altadena. Do we want to create combos in our DLIPs, or do we want to allow them that one teacher over as we move that class through? So that's one consideration for one FTE. There are others within the elementary ranks. For Wilson, because Wilson came in at roughly 50 students under the projected enrollment, then and because of the configuration of the middle school, whereas 6th and 7th are multiple subject teachers with single subject teachers at the 8th grade, we identified that if we dropped them by 3 teachers, they would not be able to run their master schedule. So these are the types of challenges that we have, and even though we peeled out a 0.6 art teacher, I believe, we still needed to leave 2 teachers so that they could maintain their master schedule. Having said that, I do appreciate what you said, Ms. Kinney, regarding developing after the fact what the difference of the projected is with what once we do the critical work, and then bringing that back to the board in terms of these are the additional positions we've had to build back in. But I will say, with the time that I was a director and the time that I've been back now, in a district of 27 schools and a CIS, 7 teachers is about average. So because you do have critical decisions that you have to make in order for a school to function, we can build in an opportunity, however, for the board to know about that and to speak to that at a place within our budgeting at the start of the school year. That's completely doable. But I did not want the assumption that we have overstaffed without thinking about it and without bringing all of the drivers together to have those critical conversations.
No, I saw the documentation, since he's referencing my comments. Mr. President, the documentation is very thorough. 3.26 added, 7.7 or 5.5 taken away, right? But then there's another column, isn't there, where general fund above staffing ratios, right, is 13.61, right? Is there not? In the your last document 404 of where you show the enrollment and staffing at each school, Dr. Barnes, it's in F38 as of November 7th. There's a column that weren't those teachers Steve was talking about, because they don't even have entries for the schools he mentioned. So there's one at Jackson. This is general fund above staff is what it says. Yeah, it's a column. It adds up to 13.61. And I get it. I get that. What I said to you, I appreciate, to Dr. McDonald and Dr. Barnes, that you all want to support principals and teachers. I like that, right? But then put yourself where I am, right? And if we keep deficit spending, increasing deficit spending, right? I'm going to go through this process again, be a record holder, right? In the worst way, right? For schools. And I don't want to do that, right? So I don't know what that column means. Maybe you do, when it says general fund above staffing ratios, 13.61, but it's there. And it's not all the little DLIP or
No, a bunch of it is DLIP, and the other parts are IB, and there might be still a science teacher at Washington Elementary.
Well, it's not in the DLIP column, but anyway. Oh, you're saying that's DLIP using SC funds? There's a DLIP using SC funds.
The general fund above staff, well,
It says general fund is why. But anyway, I don't say that you didn't do this thoughtfully and carefully and working with your colleagues that you know very well and you want to help out. We've even said to the superintendent that he has flexibility, right? Many times to do that, right? But so I'm not saying you didn't do that, right? But still, my basic point is the same, that we have a lot of staff.
Ms. Bailey?
Well, so I'm listening to what's being said, and the thing that goes through my mind, I go back to my experience working at the school sites, where we say here at this level that we're overstaffed, but the experience when you work out there at the school site is that there's not enough staff. And I've experienced that. And so here's my concern, and it applies here at Pasadena. It applies to my concern about public education in general. The way that schools are staffed, in my opinion, is an antiquated way. We are trying to staff to the needs of our student population, which is obvious. We really need to support out at the school sites. If we don't find a way to balance supporting our students and meeting the budget requirements that we need to meet. We're going to keep deficit spending. I'd rather see the supports at the school sites, and I think that we need to make that decision, whether or not we want to staff the school sites over continuing using the model that we're using for staffing and staying at this place where we deficit spend. I hear all the conversation that's going on, but this is our reality. This is our reality. And I don't know, maybe I need to do some research to find out for myself whether or not this form of staffing is something that is mandated by the staff, by the state, you know, or can Pasadena be a trendsetter and come up with a way of reorganizing the workflow and the responsibilities of the district office and the school sites so that our students could be more supported. That's the concern for me. And that's what I wanted to add to this conversation.
So not to speak for Scott too much, but I'll try. You can correct me, Scott, if I'm wrong. It's not, we're not saying there should be less staff. Fewer? Whichever one of those is correct. But if we, because it's the biggest chunk of our budget, if we don't intentionally say that's how much staff needs to be there and we know we can afford it, and it starts creeping, then we just kind of lose control of the budget. So I hope no one thinks we want fewer people at schools and we don't think we need more people to serve kids. It's just we all have to be intentional about the number of people we want to serve kids and then stick to it, because when it starts getting wishy-washy and going out, you know, when it escapes our control and just starts growing by itself, I think that's our concern, is when we're not
Yeah. You
keeping
don't have a
control.
budget.
Well, and I get that, but I mean, just say the model that we wanted to go to was ensuring that we had the supports for the students, special ed, GATE, every program that we have, every way that we could service a student. If that was the model that we decided that we were going to go to, of course we'd have to draw some boundaries and put some limitations in place. But we need to decide, I think, because right now we're trying to do some of that and some of this. Yeah. And so it's not working. It's just not working for us. And as a district, as a board, I think we need to decide exactly which. I think it's time. It's time for us to take a deep dive. We've been going through this long enough. Yeah. And it's time for us to take a deep dive to decide exactly what we want this district to look like and how we want our students served, what level of service, and you know, what quality of service. We cannot give them quality service when our staff year after year after year are feeling like they may be cut or their schools may be closed. Or, I mean, we have to decide, and we need to take a deep dive. We need to do, that's something that we need to do and get it done as soon as possible. I would say start addressing it, looking at it, talking about it. I don't know if we need to form a committee, a staff committee. I mean, but it's something that we need to look at, in my opinion, more sooner than later.
But to answer your previous question, staffing ratios, I mean, there's some limits, but in general, we set ours within those limits and can reflect our values, but we have to intentionally talk about staffing ratios and still be able to afford them.
Again, staffing ratios are not, I'm not a fan of that because it's not working out there. And all you have to do is work at a school site and experience that. You can go one day and you will experience that.
But I'm saying modify them to what you want them to be. Okay.
Mr. Torres.
Yes.
I was struck by this board policy, which we just spoke about and passed over. After the budget is adopted in June, no unrestricted expenditures for that fiscal year should be increased in subsequent revised or interim budgets throughout the fiscal year unless items being increased have been board approved. And perhaps Ms. Kenny was the one who said, sometimes we have on consent or on our various resolutions, items that we can't tell if it's beyond the budget or if it's within the budget. We do see in some of the resolutions, we see source of funding, and it says funds are available in the so-and-so account. But I know that we have been approving things that go beyond the budget, and we didn't know that they were beyond the budget. Isn't that true?
Yes, she said that.
So how can we remedy that?
Well, I mean,
Yeah, or we can say fund balance. I mean, when it comes to me, it's, can you assign an account number? So we assign an account number. Well, if you assign an account number, it could be coming from the fund balance because it's now increased that budget beyond what the original budget was. But we can say it won't have an account number. Instead, it will say fund balance, and that would,
That would signal that.
right. So, I mean, there's ways, and I'll talk with ELT about how we can remedy a lot of what you're talking about. And
I
bring
think
something back
it
to-
almost comes to the point of saying to a department head or whoever is presenting a requisition that there is no funding for that.
Yeah,
But doesn't that go back to the request that I made a couple of years ago about adding the fund, yeah,
Yeah.
to the board
that's
reports
right.
so that we could see that in advance?
Well, we see it, but that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily
Mean there's
tell
money.
us whether the proposed
Yeah.
expenditure is
Right.
going,
Well, it was supposed to
is
include.
unbudgeted.
It was supposed, oh, okay,
Yeah.
unbudgeted. I thought you were talking about us not having the